Chapter 4, The Hunt of Smoke and Shadow. Through the sparse woodland and over the crest of the hill, a dark and shapeless form approached Crow Manor. To Morgan, it looked like a swarm of locusts or a cloud of bats, but it was too low and loud to be either. The sound of hooves became deafening as the dark mass grew closer. Among the black were hundreds of specks of fiery red light, getting brighter by the second. The amorphous figure began to take shape. Heads and faces and legs grew out of the swarm, and Morgan felt her stomach drop. The glowing red lights weren't lights at all. They were eyes, the eyes of men, the eyes of horses, and the eyes of hounds. Not individuals made of flesh, more like a single living shadow. They were darkness, a pure absence of light, and they moved with purpose. They were hunting. Morgan couldn't breathe. Her chest heaved in and out as she tried to take in enough air to fill her lungs properly. What are they? Not now, said Jupiter. We have to run. But Morgan's feet felt stuck to the floor. She couldn't turn away from the window. Jupiter grasped her shoulders and looked straight into her eyes. No fear, remember? He said, giving her a little shake. Save it for later. Jupiter led Morgan away into the hall. She paused at the door. Wait, what about them? She asked, looking back toward the crows. They still gathered around the curtain on the floor, oblivious to the sound and sight of 100 ghostly hunters barreling towards the house. We can't just leave. They'll be fine. The hunt can't touch them, I promise. Come on. But Jupiter pulled her onward. It's you they're hunting, Morgan. You want to help your family? You need to get yourself far, far away from this house. Then why are we going upstairs? Jupiter didn't answer. When they reached the 3rd floor, he ran to the nearest window and flung it wide open, sticking his head out. This'll do. Ready? We're aiming for the skylight. Morgan looked out the window at the strangest machine she had ever seen. As a state chancellor, her father had been fetched from Crow Manor in all sorts of vehicles over the years. Corvus still favored his old-fashioned horse-drawn carriage for daily use, but sometimes the Wintersea party would send in expensive, dark-windowed coaches with rumbling mechanical engines, and even once a small piloted airship that needed a special permit to land on the roof. Neighbors had gathered to gawk at it and take pictures. But Corvus had never, to her knowledge, traveled in a gleaming brass pod, standing 2 stories high on 8 spindly legs like this enormous metallic spider. What would the neighbors think of this? Wondered Morgan, her eyes like saucers. I didn't park close enough, said Jupiter. We'll have to push off a bit when we jump. Jump? Surely he didn't expect her to jump out of a 3rd-story window. Jupiter climbed onto the sill and leveled his body so that he was mostly out of the window, then held out a hand to Morgan. On the count of 3, okay? No, she shook her head, backing away from the window. Not okay, the opposite of okay. Morgan, I admire your instinct for self-preservation, I really do, but I think if you look over your shoulder, your instinct might tell you to jump out the window. Morgan looked. Perilously close to the top of the staircase was a wolf-like hound with glowing red eyes, its teeth barred in low snarl. Its pack crept slowly to the last of the stairs behind him, at least a dozen, maybe more. They jostled for position, snapping their ferocious jaws and growling as they stalked Morgan, frozen in the window. No fear, she whispered, and every cell in her body whispered, yes, fear. Count of 3. Jupiter took Morgan's hand to guide her onto the ledge. 1. The hound was joined on the landing by a 2nd pack member, then a 3rd, all with the same sharp yellow teeth and fiery eyes and the swirling, smoking fur as black as pitch. Their growls vibrated all the way to Morgan's toes. 2. She stepped backwards and scrambled for Jupiter's support as her foot touched nothing but air. He wrapped his arms around her chest, and she felt him lean back, pulling her with him. The hounds launched themselves at Morgan. 3! Cold, sharp air whipped around her ears as she fell. There was an alarming shattering of glass, and then they landed hard. Jupiter's arms wrapped tightly around Morgan, his body cushioning her fall, on the floor inside the body of the giant brass spider. Among them, the hounds disappeared from the window. Oh, Jupiter moaned. I will regret that tomorrow. Off you get. He rolled Morgan onto the floor. She winced as a stray piece of glass embedded itself into the heel of her palm. Where did they go? Dunno, but they won't be gone for long. Hold on to something, said Jupiter. He ran to the control deck of the front of the vehicle and began pulling levers. The engine roared to life, and the spider lurched forward, pinching Morgan face first into a wall. She felt nausea rising in her stomach. The first bit's always bumpy, and the last bit, but don't worry, the middle bit's as smooth as silk. Sometimes. Depends, really. Morgan stumbled into the cramped cockpit and held back the old leather chair where Jupiter sat at the controls. She picked the piece of glass out of her hand and threw it away, wiping the blood on her dress. What were they? The hunt of smoke and shadow. Jupiter looked darkly over his shoulder as the spider lumbered away from the house. The haunt of... Morgan clamped a hand over her mouth, trying not to bring up her dinner all over Jupiter's panel of shiny buttons and levers, or worse, the back of his head. She felt like she was in a small boat on a choppy sea. What do they want with me? But Jupiter was distracted, trying to steer and change gears and stay upright all at the same time. Strap yourself into the passenger seat, he said, jerking his head towards the battered-looking chair on his left. Morgan pulled herself over to it with some difficulty and clicked the seatbelt into the place across her chest. Ready? Hold tight. The spider climbed over the gates of Crow Manor in great, staggering strides. The wood loomed ahead, but Jupiter steered in another direction, towards the center of Jackaloflax. On the smooth road, the movements of the mechanical spider evened out as it picked up a downhill speed. Jackaloflax was awash with the light and noise of the early fireworks show, and a crowd had gathered to see the night ablaze with color. Morgan had never seen Empire Row so full of people. The 8-legged machine scurried through town center, skirting the edges of the crowd. Jupiter couldn't have timed it more perfectly. The spectacle in the sky was a brilliant cover for their escape from the hunt of smoke and shadow. Everyone was looking up, their ears filled with whistles and bangs. Shouldn't we be heading out of town, not into it? Asked Morgan. We're taking a shortcut, said Jupiter. He was steering them straight towards Town Hall. The vehicle stood to a full height with a grinding of its metal joints and stepped delicately through the crowd, looking for all the world as if it were walking on tiptoes. What is this thing? This spider thing? This spider thing, as you've indelicately baptized it, said Jupiter, giving her a pointed look, is called an arachnopod, and it's the most exquisite machine ever built. A particularly loud firecracker shattered in the night sky, leaving a trail of flowered-shaped smoke in its wake, the ghost of an explosion. The crowd made noises of delight. Beautiful, isn't she? Her name's Octavia. One of only 2 anacropods ever built. I knew the inventor. Pull that blue lever for me, will ya? No, the other one, that's it. The arachnopod juddered to a halt. Jupiter frowned. He stood up and ran to the back of the pod, looking anxiously out of the domed glass walls. Is something wrong? Interesting machines like this are out of fashion now, of course, he continued, as if nothing had happened. But I'll never let go of old Aussie. She's too reliable. However, hover ships and automobiles, they're all very modern and flashy. But like I always say, you can't roll over a mountain and you can't hover underwater. Octavia can go almost anywhere, which is useful in moments like this. We appear to be rather cornered. He returned to the control deck, reached up to the ceiling, and pulled down a screen with 4 split images. Each showed a different view from the arachnopod. The hunt of smoke and shadow had caught up with them. They were surrounded on all sides by the huntsmen on horseback and on their slavering hooves. How is any of that helpful in moments like this? Morgan's heart raced. This is it, she thought. We're trapped. This is the end. I don't see any mountains or water. No mountains, no, but there is that. She followed his gaze to the top of the clock tower. The really excellent thing about spiders, he said, strapping himself to the driver's seat, is the way they crawl. Fasten your seatbelt, Morgan Crow, and whatever you do, don't close your eyes. What happens if I close my eyes? You'll miss the fun. Morgan had barely managed to check her seatbelt when the arachnopod suddenly reared back, throwing her against her chair. Two great spindly metallic legs latched into the eaves of Town Hall, and the pod itself heaved upward, lurching higher and higher towards the black, fathomless facade of the sky-faced clock. It's not ideal, but as an improvised emergency gateway, it's not my worst idea ever. She had no idea what he was talking about. Gateway to where? You'll see. Morgan looked back through the glass dome. The ground swam yards below, and worse than that, the huge black smoke hunters had dismounted and were climbing the tower. "They're behind us," cried Morgan. Jupiter grimaced, but he didn't look back. "Not for long. The hunt can't follow where we're going." "Where are we going?" They arrived at the top of the tower as the fireworks display reached its dramatic climax. Explosions of red and gold and blue and purple lighting up the night sky. "We're going home," Morgan Crow. The arachnopod put one spindly leg through the clock. The glass didn't break. It didn't even crack. Another leg went through, gently ripping the clock face like a pebble on the surface of a deep black lake. Morgan stared open-mouthed. One more impossible thing in a night of impossible things. She turned back. The huntsmen were so close their breath could have fogged up Octavia's glass dome. They reached their skeletal arms as if to grab Morgan through the back window and pull her downward to her death. She wanted to squeeze her eyes shut, but she couldn't look away. With one final heave, the arachnopod pitched forward and tumbled through the clock face, spinning over and over, throwing Morgan into the unknown. The sound of exploding firecracks disappeared. The world had gone silent. All right, I'm going to record another chapter today, so I will be back tomorrow. I'm going to post it tomorrow for Chapter 5, Welcome to Nevermore.